Homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. In today's Dhamma session, we're looking at the Avakujja Sutta. This is Anguttara Nikaya, Chapter 3, Discourse number 30. In this particular sutta, the Buddha looks at the different kinds of persons and the way that they listen to Dhamma and the resultant wisdom. So the question we're asking in this session is, what is the ideal way to listen to the Dhamma? So the sutta begins with, Bhikkhus, there are these three kinds of persons found existing in the world. What three? The person with inverted wisdom, the person with lap-like wisdom, and the person with wide wisdom. So we're going to go through each of these different kinds of persons, the way they listen to Dhamma, and the resultant wisdom. The first one the Buddha talks about is a person with inverted wisdom. In Pali, this is Avakujja Panya. Avakujja means face down, bent over, turned upside down, therefore inverted. So the Buddha says, and what bhikkhus is the person with inverted wisdom? Here some person often goes to the monastery to listen to the Dhamma from the bhikkhus. The bhikkhus teach him the Dhamma that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing. They reveal the perfectly complete and pure spiritual life. While he is sitting in his seat, he does not contemplate that talk at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end. After he has risen from his seat, he still does not contemplate that talk at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end. Just as, when a pot is turned upside down, the water had been poured into it runs off and does not remain there, so too some person often goes to the monastery to listen to the Dhamma from the bhikkhus, and the same description that the Buddha gave before, and then after he has risen from his seat, he still does not contemplate that talk in the beginning, in the middle, or at the end. This is called the person with inverted wisdom. What we can see from the Buddha's words here is the person does all the right things by going to listen to a Dhamma talk from the right teachers, and the teaching is good, with the right meaning and phrasing, and yet even while they're sitting there, they don't contemplate the talk all the way through. And when they get up from their seats and return home, they still don't contemplate. So this is inverted wisdom. Now, there are times where we are all like this, particularly at the beginning. The mind is too covered with hindrances, or there are too many distractions, or the mind is completely unsettled. And therefore, you've done all the right things and you go and listen, but nothing is going in. And so, if you're unable to contemplate that during the talk with attentive ears and being able to discern the true Dhamma, then it is a loss. And again, when you get up from your seat and you're still unable to contemplate that Dhamma, take away the Buddha's words, or even repeat those words in your mind, certain fragrant pieces, then it's also a loss. So this is what the Buddha terms the person with inverted wisdom. The second is a person with lap-like wisdom. In Pali, this is Ujjhanga Panyo. So Ujjhanga translates as the lap or the hip. And from the simile that the Buddha gives us, we'll understand why he calls this lap-like wisdom. And the Buddha says, and what is the person with lap-like wisdom? Here some person often goes to the monastery to listen to the Dhamma from the bhikkhus. The bhikkhus teach him the Dhamma that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing. They reveal the perfectly complete and pure spiritual life. While he is sitting in his seat, he contemplates that talk at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. But after he has risen from his seat, he does not contemplate that talk at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end. Just as, when a person has various foodstuffs strewn over his lap, sesame seeds, rice grains, cakes, and jujubes, if he loses his mindfulness when rising from that seat, he would scatter them all over. So too some person often goes to the monastery to listen to the Dhamma from the bhikkhus, same description after that, but after he has risen from his seat, he does not attend to that talk at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end. This is called the person with lap-like wisdom. So we can see again, the person does all the right things and goes to listen to the right teachings that have the right meaning and phrasing, and during the talk they are more successful. They contemplate the talk throughout, and so they gain some wisdom from doing that. But when they get up from their seat and go on and move on to other things, they don't contemplate that talk. And so that's where there is still a loss that they experience. And the simile there is when you get up off your seat and you've been eating and you have things that are on your lap and maybe you forget about that and then it goes everywhere. And so there's certain gems of the talk that are lost when you stand up like that, when you rise from your seat and you don't contemplate any further. So there is something in that the Buddha wants us to contemplate. The final one is a person with wide wisdom. In Pali, this is putupanyo. So putu is translated as numerous, far and wide, several, many, more. Putupanyo then becomes far and wide wisdom or simply wide wisdom. So the Buddha says, and what is the person with wide wisdom? Here some person often goes to the monastery to listen to the Dhamma from the bhikkhus. The bhikkhus teach him the Dhamma that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing. They reveal the perfectly complete and pure spiritual life. While he is sitting in his seat, he contemplates that talk at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. After he has risen from his seat, again he contemplates that talk at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. Just as when a pot is kept upright, the water that had been poured into it stays there and does not run off, so too some person often goes to the monastery to listen to the Dhamma from the bhikkhus, and so on. After he has risen from his seat, again he attends to that talk at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. This is called the person with wide wisdom. So with this final person, this is what we aspire to. With the effort that we make to go and listen to the Dhamma, whether it is at the monastery or even on the internet or any time that we give to listening to the Dhamma, it's important that we're able to make the most of that effort and to be able to contemplate wisely during the talk, beginning, middle, and end, and also once we get up off our seat as well, that it permeates and we are able to develop this wide wisdom. What is interesting is that most of us, in terms of spiritual development, we probably land somewhere between lap-like wisdom to this wide wisdom. One of the most difficult things I think that arises from this is that we find it very difficult to retain what we've heard. And this is very much a bahussuta quality, being able to cognize what we are listening to and to convert it to some kind of insight or wisdom, and then to retain what we've heard and put it into practice. The challenge for most of us is often that transition from lap-like wisdom to wide wisdom. And that's an interesting challenge for us. For some people, what they do when they listen, particularly if they're listening at home or something like that, they make notes, or they specifically pick something from the talk in order to take it away to contemplate later. So quite often, it's not easy to retain everything. With the busyness in our lives and different things, particularly in lay life, it makes it difficult to retain everything. So quite often people, they take away one or two things. And then what you do is, once you finish the talk, if that is something that has strongly resonated, something that where you feel that there is an insight that has arisen during the talk, you take that with you and you start to really contemplate at home. And that's how you develop this wider wisdom. Then the Buddha summarizes by saying, the person with inverted wisdom, stupid and undiscerning, often goes to visit bhikkhus to hear them teach the Dhamma. Yet this person cannot grasp anything from the talk, at its beginning, middle, and end, for he utterly lacks wisdom. The person with lap-like wisdom is said to be better than the former. He too often goes to visit bhikkhus to hear them teach the Dhamma. While sitting in his seat, he grasps the phrasing of the talk, at its beginning, middle, and end. But after rising, he no longer understands, but forgets what he had learned. The person with wide wisdom is said to be the best of these. He too often goes to visit bhikkhus to hear them teach the Dhamma. While sitting in his seat, he comprehends the phrasing at the beginning, middle, and end of the talk given by the bhikkhu. This person of the best intentions, his mind undivided, retains what he hears, practicing in accordance with the Dhamma, he can make an end of suffering. When we look at the summary that the Buddha has given at the end, we can see that there's a few things that really ring true. The person with inverted wisdom, although they've attended the talk and appear to be listening, they're only there in body but not in mind. They haven't grasped anything from the talk. And so they're very foolish in that respect. Therefore, the Buddha says that they utterly lack wisdom because they haven't grasped anything during the talk, and neither would they have taken anything away from the talk in order to contemplate later and to apply. Then when it comes to the second person, the person with lap-like wisdom, the results are better because during the talk they're able to grasp some of the phrasing of the talk. So maybe there's some words of the Buddha or something that has arisen during the talk that stays in the mind. But the problem is when they get up off their seat, they no longer understand. So they may still remember part of the talk, but there is no connection to deepen the wisdom of it. So what happens is you forget what you've learned. So this is also a great loss because, again, you've made the effort, you're there in body, and for that time, the mind is there with you during the talk. But once you get up off your seat, everything is lost. It's fallen to the ground. You've left it there. And so this is difficult because what happens is when you go to practice at home or in daily life, you don't have what you have gained from the talk. This is where the challenge is for most people, that you're really in it sometimes when you're listening to the talk and the hindrances have been subdued and certain attainments or certain faculties are sharpened and maybe even the enlightenment factors are activated. But the problem comes in that you don't remember when you turn off that talk or you've left. And that is the real challenge here, I think, for people to convert that into wide wisdom. So the third category is the person with wide wisdom, that this is considered by the Buddha as the best of all, and quite rightly so, because you do all the right things, you attend in body and mind to the talk, and so you comprehend. And I think that's the thing, the comprehension is something that is quite key compared to the other two. While you're listening, you are connecting with the Dhamma. Certain examples are coming in your mind that go, I see where that comes from. I see how I do that. I see how I fall in certain instances. And you follow the instructions of the Buddha and something in there goes, I get it. When that happens, and it may not be with everything during a talk, but it may be with certain aspects of the talk, then what happens is you have the best intention to then go, I'm taking that away with me to contemplate in daily life outside of this session, and I will put it into practice. And so that kind of person, their mind is right on it when it comes to the talk. Their mind is activated, active, arousing energy. It's easier for this kind of person to retain what has been heard. They are using their own examples. They are thinking about the insight pathways. They are really taking on board what is being said, and they may be memorizing or writing down in some instances what the Buddha is saying or what is being instructed. So therefore, when it comes to practice, it's easier. You have the notes, or you have connected in some way that is being retained in the mind. And let's not forget, the Buddha says that to be bahussuta, accomplished, one needs to be able to retain what has been heard. Then you become one of much learning. This is the way, the Buddha says, one with wide wisdom, that this kind of person can make an end to all suffering. And rightly so. When we talk about the trainee qualities, the seika qualities, then we know that bahussuta, one of much learning, is something that one needs to be accomplished in. And we learn this from the Sekapatipada Sutta, that this is in Majjhima Nikaya, discourse number 53, but also Nagaropama Sutta, this is Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 7, discourse number 67. In both those suttas, the Buddha says, one who has heard much, has remembered what one has heard, has accumulated what one has heard. Whatever teachings are good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, that in their meaning and expression, so these are phrases, consonants, syllables, proclaim the holy life that is entirely complete and pure. Those one has listened to a great deal, retained, discussed, accumulated, examined with one's mind, and well penetrated in terms of one's views. When you think about much learning, as we can recall from our session, learning is about hearing things and studying things, but it's also about retaining it, being able to remember it, being able to discuss it, and then being able to develop on it, being able to examine it and practice with it, and therefore you penetrate it through that process. So clearly, the person with wide wisdom has this quality. The other sutta that resonates is the Nīvarana Sutta. This is Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 46, discourse number 38. We've referenced this before, and it's about listening with eager ears. The Buddha says, when bhikkhus, a noble disciple, listens to the Dhamma with eager ears, attending to it as a matter of vital concern, directing his whole mind to it, on that occasion the 5 hindrances are not present in him. On that occasion, the 7 factors of enlightenment go to fulfillment by development. So this is the thing. We can turn up for a Dhamma talk, but almost like have the off switch right there. So you're there in body, but the mind is switched off. By comparison, anivarana means that you are with eager ears and you have subdued the 5 hindrances. And so on that occasion, the Buddha says the 7 factors of enlightenment are being developed, and they can go to fulfillment by development. It's really important not to be taken over by the 5 hindrances. So sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, and doubt. When we lead very busy lives and we have lots on our plate and lots of different issues pertaining to daily life, sometimes it's very difficult to come and listen with eager ears. We're there in body, but not in mind. So it's very important to make that conscious, to know that this is very important time, that if you give the time to Dhamma, one needs to make the most of it, not to just go for the sake of going, but to really give yourself the opportunity to train, to develop, to soak in what is wholesome. Because most of the time what we do is we're very used to sitting in front of the TV or slouching on the couch or other such things. Now, it's not all the time, but there are times that are like that, and one needs to admit to oneself that these things are possible, where you're looking at your smartphone or other gadget and just absorbing all these things that pollute the mind. But when it comes to Dhamma, one needs to have a different approach. It's not entertainment. It's something that is quite precious and quite important if one wants to bring about the complete end of suffering, or even if it's not the complete end of suffering, but to reduce suffering. So you want to make the most of that scenario. So oftentimes it's very good to make sure that you've given yourself the best possible opportunity to listen to the Dhamma, so you feel refreshed. So if you're at home and you're watching a Dhamma video or listening to a podcast or something like that, then what you need to do is make sure that you're invigorated in the body, your posture is good, so you give yourself the best possible chance to stay alert. Then also at the same time, the mind needs to be subdued. So if you need to apply certain medicine, like the medicine for the 5 hindrances, prior to the talk, and you make a very strong intention just before you listen to the talk, that is also very, very helpful. So these are the things that are very useful when it comes to how to make the most of even the shortest moment of time in order to listen. Now, it's also understandable that there are times that we're driving in the car, we listen to Dhamma, or we are also cooking and doing other things and listening to Dhamma. Sometimes people, their time is short, so they do that. It's good to know that there are times when it's like that, that maybe you're not able to soak in as much. But it's still good listening to Dhamma, but it's just important to know the best conditions for one to have wide wisdom. I think it's up to each individual to discern and to contemplate and to also make wise choices around how one listens to Dhamma. So it's never a loss when it comes to listening to good Dhamma in any kind of form. But in terms of the attainment of wisdom, you need to be able to have all your faculties focused on it. So if you're doing other things like driving and cooking and preparing things, then of course you're going to be somewhat distracted. So you're not going to hear everything that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good at the end. So it's just important to know that. But at the same time, you decide. You're in the driving seat. You're the one that determines how well you do in Dhamma, how well you're able to attend, how well you're able to contemplate. And in terms of memorizing, I think it's very clear by now that part of the Buddha's teaching is to memorize the Buddha's words, memorize the instruction, to retain what you've understood, the insights and everything. So it's nothing about just blotting everything out and just stilling in that sense. When there are challenges, it's always very good to be able to recall the Buddha's words, to recall what it is that really you connected with. And in that way, you can lead yourself out of the mental challenge that comes in your meditation, in your development. There's a sutta called the Sila Sutta in Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 46, discourse number 3. So it's part of the chapter on enlightenment factors or awakening factors, the bojjhangas. And it draws the link or the connection between when you attend to someone with attainments or listen to a talk of someone with purity and attainments, then as a result of that, there is a withdrawal of one's body and withdrawal of one's mind. So withdrawal that we're talking about is withdrawing from the world, withdrawing from what pollutes the mind. So the Buddha talks about when you dwell withdrawn, you recollect that Dhamma and you think it over. And so when you dwell in that way, recollecting and thinking it over, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is aroused. And if you keep developing that, then what happens is it can develop to fulfillment. The same thing then he goes on to say, when you dwell mindfully in this way, you then discriminate the Dhamma with wisdom. You examine it, you make investigation of it. So when you dwell in this way, mindfully discriminating and examining the Dhamma, then what happens is the enlightenment factor of investigation arises. When that arises and is aroused, then you keep developing that enlightenment factor of Dhammavicaya, so being able to discriminate and investigate the Dhamma, then that can develop to fulfillment. Then it goes on to say that when you're discriminating the Dhamma in that way with wisdom, examining it and making an investigation of it, then energy is aroused without slackening. And so when your energy is aroused in this way and you keep contemplating the Dhamma, investigating it, then on that occasion the enlightenment factor of energy is aroused. And then you develop that and it can be developed to fulfillment. It goes on then to say that when the energy is aroused and spiritual rapture arises, with the energy aroused, on that occasion the enlightenment factor of rapture is aroused. And if you keep developing that enlightenment factor of rapture, then it can come to fulfillment by development. Then it goes on and says, when the mind is uplifted by rapture, then the body becomes tranquil and the mind becomes tranquil. So when that's the case, the enlightenment factor of tranquility is aroused. And if you keep developing the enlightenment factor of tranquility, then eventually that will be developed to fulfillment. So when the body is tranquil and one has a happy mind, so the mind becoming concentrated and the body is tranquil and you're happy, then the enlightenment factor of concentration is aroused. When that is developed, this enlightenment factor of concentration, you keep developing, then it comes to fulfillment by development. And then when you closely look on with equanimity at the mind that is concentrated, and you keep looking in that way, then the enlightenment factor of equanimity is aroused. When that is the case and you keep developing the enlightenment factor of equanimity, then on that occasion, the enlightenment factor of equanimity comes to fulfillment by development. So you can see how that works, that there is a particular sequence when you listen carefully with contemplation, you can arouse these 7 factors of enlightenment, and it's very helpful to the path. These are the things that when you listen in the correct way, with the ideal kind of setting, the ideal kind of conditions in oneself and externally, then these are the things that are very helpful to the path. We've now come to the end of our Dhamma session, and we can take this as encouragement from the Buddha around how to optimize the way we listen to Dhamma and connect with the Dhamma, contemplate the Dhamma, and then put it into practice. The person with inverted wisdom is the one that we really don't want to be like. We don't want to only attend to a Dhamma talk in body and not in mind, because that person doesn't grasp anything and utterly lacks wisdom, as the Buddha has said. So it's foolish practice in many ways. When it comes to the person with lab-like wisdom, many of us can connect with this because there are times that we feel that we connect with the Dhamma during the talk, but after the talk, it feels like we've forgotten or we can't put something into practice. So we know it's a good thing to diagnose it that way and then to look at what can we do? So quite often the 5 hindrances are what trouble during a talk. It's quite evident there may be sensual thoughts or ill will thinking, or the one that is most prevalent is sloth and torpor. Many people go into dull samadhi or some kind of drowsy state. When that is there, the mind is very far away from connecting with the Dhamma. And that's why when we do particular sessions, it's important that we connect through our own examples. We turn in our minds the similes of the Buddha. There's always an active process going on. And I think that's the key. Active energy is what is required when it comes to listening to a Dhamma talk. You don't sit there very passively. The mind absorbs what is being said, but it tries to connect with it, tries to see how does that connect with what's going on in my situation, in my life, or with the certain defilements that are there. What is blocking the path? And so the attitude is very key when it comes to listening to Dhamma. In other cases, when you're at home and you're listening to a Dhamma talk that is very precise in the instructions from the Buddha, sometimes it's very good to write things down, very good to write the instructions, the inside pathway, or to write notes about certain suttas that you need to go and refer to later on. Because if you look at the bahussuta quality, the accomplishment in much learning, that entire process, it is studying, memorizing, but also discussing the Dhamma, then also meditating on the Dhamma, and then receiving the insight or the wisdom from the practice. So it's a full and complete process. When it comes to wide wisdom, you realize that this person is not like lap-like wisdom. They don't forget what they've heard. They have gotten up from their seats and they still remember what they've heard, and they put it into practice. And so the intention needs to be there. Like when the Buddha talks about the best intentions, I think one of the key things is to make a strong determination, once you know this teaching, that it's good to really connect with this. I need to retain as much as possible. And whatever I don't retain, I'll make a note because I want to investigate further outside of this talk. And so that kind of person is very diligent towards the practice in all the ways that count. So attending in body and mind to a talk, but also attending outside of the talk. Meditation gives this wrong kind of connotation at times about development. Bhavana is really about development. When we look at development of the Noble Eightfold Path, we're talking about bhavata kaya, development of the body, bhavata sila, development of virtue, bhavata citta, development of mind, and bhavata panya, development of wisdom. These are how we activate the Noble Eightfold Path. And so when you see it in that way, development gives a better connotation, a better explanation about what we're trying to do. We can end the session here. Let's share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Blessings of the Triple Gem, wishing you well. Teruan Saranai.